All right. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining in. I'd like for us to start out by reviewing or recalling some of the main points that we remember from our last study, from our last discussion here. And but before we do that, I would like for someone online. There's just 3 of us here, so it's going to be to those of us online today. One of us online to read for us from. Let me share my screen. James chapter 5. James 5 verses 1 to 4. So,
Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you. And the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you.
May the Lord bless His word. Amen. All right. So, any takers? We have a couple of minutes. Let's quickly remind ourselves some of the things we learned last week from James 4. Let me see. Any of us here can share as well. You'd have to speak up so that you have some, or repeat what you say anyway. Let's go.
So last week, let's say we wanted to study two topics. First part, we talk about slander. Let us start by defining what slander is. Slander is saying something against somebody that is not true.
Yes.
And you can see that James is warning them that they should not slander against one another, because if they do so, they are if and anyone who speaks against his brother or generally speak against the Lord and generally speak. And I think we everyone try to contribute, I guess, on what we look at from verse 11 to 12. I think we ask us a question that does that mean that we should not nobody have the right to correct,
criticize,
to start there. I think somebody said that even if you want to start, make sure that
yes, he's not guilty of it.
Not a victim of that. And the thing downward,
yes.
Look at another activity that is posting about tomorrow.
I think it would be best if both of you guys start, since it's just us today. Like here. So you're closer and we can hear you better. Yes, sorry, just round up what you were saying.
Okay. So verse 13 will also look at posting. Say from verse 13 you can see that James was started by saying, now listen, you say tomorrow, today or tomorrow we'll go to this city, that city, do this, do that. Because we don't know what tomorrow is going to be. We only know what is happening now. We don't know what is going to happen in the next 1 minute. But because of all this, what we are up to say that if the Lord's will, we are going to do this, we are going to do that. Yes. So I think these are some of the things we also looked at last week.
Okay, so thank you. I'll just try to recap in 1 or 2 sentences what Bro Inusa has said. He has said that the lesson last week was divided into two subtopics from James 4, starting from verse 13. And that The first topic addressed was about speaking evil to each other, against one another. And this covered different kinds of evil that we can speak against one another: harmful speech, like questioning authority, slandering someone, bringing false accusations. James said that this meant speaking evil against the law. All right. And he also said that the second part of the lesson last week was that James was condemning people who talked about the future as if they had it all figured out, and talked about, basically, right? So those are the two subtopics according to Brian from last week, and that's a fair summary, I would say. So anybody else online? Somebody online, what do we recall from our last discussion? Let me call names.
Okay, I remember also that the Kimwole mentioned that, of course, it's not as if everywhere you go to or whatever it is you want to do, that it has to be your set to always have it, like a sure thing that you know that despite your plans, that it is God that has a mindset that whatever you're doing, that God has the final say. So that have it as a mindset instead of just going about everything you want to say. You say, if the Lord wills, if the Lord wills. I remember that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ichi. Thank you. Anybody else? Anything from last weekend or from last week's study? You know what? Since we started late, let's just dive right in. Okay. So basically, we already gave the overview from last week, or from Inusa and Sachichi. You know how that James warned of two grave issues that many in the church are in danger of or want to fall into, and apparently, for him to be addressing it in his letter to the churches in discretion, these were two things that were already happening, in their midst. And yes, and they were harmful speech, speaking evil against one another. And also, the second one is very interesting because it connects directly to what we're talking about today. The second was on the impermanence of life and how that it should affect the way we talk about the future, the way we make plans about the future. So James there was talking about people who made plans about the future, or who made plans, without considering or factoring in the will of God. All right. So today we're going to be looking at people who handle wealth or riches or money without factoring in or considering the law of God. All right. So, so in this chapter 5, verses 1 to 6 that we have before us to discuss, James warns of another set of, I identify 4 grave sins and issues that were apparently already happening amongst his audience, to which, which he warns them. And we'll notice that he employs a similar style as Old Testament prophets in denouncing this sin. His tone is much harsher than in chapter 4, much harsher than in chapter 2, than in, I think, pretty much the entire book so far. His tone is revved to the max, and he's denouncing these 4 sins, with as much venom as he could muster at the time. All right, so we'll go verse by verse and try to break it down, the meanings, and then we'll try to think about how it applies to us. And then we'll come back and do a summary of the overall picture of James's message in these verses. Okay, so he starts by saying, "Come now." I'm reading from the ESV, sorry. This is the ESV version. It says, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you." You may notice from last week, verse 13 of chapter 4, that this is the same way James starts those set of verses, right? In trying to get his readers' attention, It says, come now. It's like, it's a way of almost rudely, tersely, or sternly trying to get somebody's attention. It's an offhanded and stern way to address somebody, like, almost like, hey, you, like you're trying to talk to someone, snap him out of whatever it is he's thinking about or doing at that moment to get his attention. And usually people don't start addressing people like that when they have something nice or something cool, to say. All right, sorry, please excuse me. One moment. Is this the lights? All right, so sorry about that. Okay, so so here James uses this same way of catching his readers' attention, and immediately we are just like in chapter 4, verse 13, and what follows after. He's not about to flatter them. He's about to bring a scathing rebuke or warning. Other translations translate it as, like the NIV says, now listen. It's like pulling your ears, right? The NLT says, look here. And the KJV says, go to now. All right? The idea is simple. He wants to abruptly stop his readers in their tracks. He wants to say something that they must pay utmost attention to. Okay, so next he goes on. He says, he said, come now. And then he addresses who he's talking to. He says, you rich. And I think this is something we need to critically talk about. So we'll need some interactivity too. I want your opinions as to get your opinions as to who exactly James is talking about here or talking to here. He says, you rich, right? And it's important before we continue that we properly identify the class or group, specific group of people that he's addressing here. All right. So in chapter 2, we remember in chapter 2 that he had talked about some rich people who were being favored in the church, right? How that when they came to church, they give them the nice seats, the front seats. They tell the poor guy, hey, you, come and sit on the floor at the back. And he rebukes the believers in the church for their favoritism, right? That was a memorable lesson we had many weeks ago from chapter 2. So is it this same set of people that he's addressing so sternly, or is it someone else? So now I looked this up and I found that that scholars are actually somewhat slightly divided as to who exactly James is talking to. Is he talking to rich Christians within the church? Is he talking to professing Christians in the wider Christian circle? Is he talking to rich non-Christian people outside of the church? Okay. I would go with the third option because of the contents and the context and how it fits in or doesn't fit in with the way he addressed the other supposedly rich people in the rest of the book. So I would say that James here was addressing rich feudal lords or rich landowners back in first century Palestine. All right. So the background here is that James was written in the 40s, right? Or thereabouts, in the 40s. He was head of the church in the 40s. That was like the decade after when Jesus was crucified and ascended, resurrected and ascended back to heaven. So maybe AD 46 or thereabouts. And what has happened is that the church had fallen out of favor with the authorities and with the general populace and were being persecuted. This one doesn't work with this one. It's making this. All right, so we're being persecuted. And what had happened was that many people who were already settled in Jerusalem, in the cities and the towns in and around Jerusalem, had to flee for their lives. They were forced into fleeing, and lived as, what's that word? I think somewhat like IDPs, or poor people, or nomads, people, displaced people generally, who of course now needed to do menial work, whether it was their profession before or not, move from place to place, working just to feed, hand to mouth kind of living, away from their homes, dispersed, to escape being persecuted in Jerusalem. All right, so these guys were they were walking around with a target on their backs, all right, for Shylock, rich people, for unscrupulous landowners who could not resist taking advantage of them in their states, in their poor state, knowing that, I mean, these are the rich Christians, people are causing trouble, you know, and all of that. So they were not just poor, they were out of favor Christians who probably had been displaced and found themselves, you know, like some scholars said, in the northeastern and northwestern sides of Jerusalem, you know, in the countryside. All right, which is why James in the beginning talks about the dispersion, people, the Christians, believers, scattered everywhere. So scholars believe that these were the people James was addressing, these landowners, that these believers came to work on their farms, work on their plantations, and what have you. All right. At the same time, one should not be too quick to put it past. I wouldn't put it past professing Christians to behave, you know, in such, I would say, a manner as to deserve the kind of you know, red hot warning that James is bringing their way in this passage. So it could be either of the two, you know, or some other group, but I think it's specifically this general, not necessarily Christian, rich landowners, you know, for whom these poor Christian believers were working. All right, and okay, so now one more reason before I go on that I believe that these were not people within the church that James was talking to. It's important to get this right, is because if they were, he would simply have addressed them head on and command them to repent. Somebody please read for us. Maybe I'll call somebody so we're quick. Sister Tolu, sorry, I know you're there. Please read for us from 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 17 to 19.
First Timothy 6.
17 to 19.
First Timothy 6, 17 to 19.
Yes.
Okay. As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life.
Amen. Thank you, Sister Tulu.
Amen.
All right. So basically, James was not referring to all rich men. In fact, this is important again because some liberal theologians that lean towards a Marxist ideology, you know, this socialist kind of people that believe that, hey, you know, they don't believe in capitalism. They don't believe that there should be differences in people's economic status. Everybody should be on the same level. Those who have more should give it all away to the state and so let it be redistributed so that everybody is on the same level. They don't believe in those kind of things. They cite James 5 to say that James was saying what was supporting our position, but that is not what James is saying. James is not against capitalism. He's not against people being more well off than others. He's specifically referring to rich people, all right, in that time who were unjust, who had been unjust and oppressive. Okay, so like in the previous passage, like I said, where he warned about those who made their plans, you know, without the will of God in mind. And we established last week that it is not bad to make plans, but you must have the will of God in mind. You must submit your plans to the will of God. You must know that, like Proverbs says, it says, many are the plans of a man's heart, but it is the Lord's will that prevails. And elsewhere it says, the answer of the mouth is from the Lord. Finally, what happens is of the Lord. And when Christians plan, we should know that God is sovereign over our lives and over our plans, right? So, so James is not addressing all rich men. He is, he's specifically warning about oppressive and unjust rich people. So just as he talked about people who made plans without the will of God in their hearts, in their minds, he's here warning those who misuse their wealth and their power without the law of God in mind. So there is no sin in being rich, like we just read from 1 Timothy 6. God gives us all things to enjoy. So God is the giver of wealth, right? So James is not condemning that. However, a kind of sin that rich people are wont to, this is something really common with a lot of rich people, is a temptation that rich people seem to be most likely to fall into, which is to misuse their position, their power, their prestige, and their wealth. All right, so I have a question for us very quickly. So do we think, when you read a verse like this, you're like, these wicked rich people, right? Now then, James, give it to them, fire them, don't spare them. Yes, they are very wicked people. We often have the mindset or think that it has nothing at all to do with us, has no application towards us because we do not consider ourselves rich. So do we think that this applies to us in any way? Or we just observe ourselves and say, I am not rich, therefore this verse flies over my head, it's not for me. So I'll call somebody if nobody answers within the next 15 seconds. Do we think this warning about riches has anything to do with us? Thomas.
Yes. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Thomas.
Yes, it has.
In what way?
It has to do with us. Because number one, the Bible was written. This passage was written to Christians in the church. For there to be Christians in the church means that when to write about this means that there are definitely rich people too in the church. So whatever warning that is being passed here for the rich actually applies.
Okay.
Because
Okay, so quickly we'll move on.
Sorry, I wanted to say.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes. Go ahead.
I wanted to say yes. It does apply to us because, like you tried to, the way I see it is not the fact that they had money that was the issue, but their attitude, their motive, and what they did with the money. So it's a thing of the heart. So yes, I am not rich by any standard, but the little I have, am I oppressing others? Have I cheated someone to get it? What is my attitude with that which I have? So in this case, we could say, okay, the riches being talked about here could be relative. Whether I'm very rich or I'm not rich, it's about my heart, my attitude, and how I relate to people who do not have or as not as what's the word I'm looking for now? Maybe opportune or fortunate as I am. So yes, I think it does apply to us too.
All right, thank you. All right, so interesting. So yes, I also think that depending on our perspective, that it does apply to us. Now, I'll try to, you might disagree with me, but I'll try to stretch it a little bit. So for example, we would say we are not rich. I would say I'm not rich, but I thought about it. Just 200 years ago, kings, emperors, right, did not have some of the amenities.
Sorry, Bro Peter. Hello? Sorry to interrupt you. Please, who is the host? Who is the host of the study? Are you the host?
I think so. Bro Joel.
Some people have been trying to get in.
Oh, really? I can't see anybody here. Let me see.
It's Joel.
So say your wife. I don't know.
It's Uncle Joel that we enable it.
Okay, brother Joe.
Now.
They are in now.
They are in now.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
All right. It's okay. It's okay to look out for the interest of others. Thank you. All right. So I was going to say that I think that this verse has more to do with us, than it seems at face value. What do I mean? I was saying that like 200 years ago, when you think of it, that emperors, kings, right, even heads of states, political heads of state and all that, they do not have some of the amenities and some of the luxuries that we have today. All right. Yes, the standard of who is rich and all of that has shifted. But think about it. We have electricity, even though in Nigeria, let's put that aside. We have running water. Many of us in our houses, we're able to move about. We don't, we don't have to walk tens of kilometers every day. We can take vehicles, we can drive ourselves. Some of us who have cars, we can enter public transport and cover vast amounts of land that was unthinkable before. And even by today's standards, all right, as of 2019, it's rated that about 40.1% of Nigerians, were living below the poverty level, less than $2 a day. All right, that's almost 1 in 2 people. And that's not factoring the year of COVID. We'll see what it's like by next year when they do the statistics, when they release the statistics. But my point is, relative to the vast majority of people on earth, relative to the global population, a lot of us are actually doing quite well, even though we would not admit it. We're doing quite well relative to the vast majority, of people. Okay, so that's one point on one hand. And secondly, or thirdly, I think James here is trying to hit at the spirit of covetousness in our hearts, the spirit of trusting in earthly riches or possessions. And that has nothing to do with having $1 trillion. We might have just a few possessions that may be so prized and may be idols in our hearts, or we may want in our hearts, more possessions. Of course, that's what covetousness is. So I think James here, his rebuke here at least touches those of us who would not readily identify ourselves as rich. All right, and I have a list of questions that I'll just read out that I think we should all try to apply to ourselves or ask ourselves. So do we think, number one question, do we think we will be, or let me personalize it, do I think I will be happier with just a little more money, or let me say a bit more money and wealth and possessions and power and position than I currently have? Would I be happier? Do I think having something like that will make me feel much better? Question number two, do I reckon my self-worth more with my earthly status and possessions and education and achievements? Do I rely on how much money I have in my account to feel secure? Do I believe I deserve more than those who have less or more? There's a way you see people who have less than you do, who have lesser station than you in life, and in your heart, like, oh yeah, I deserve to be 1 or 2 steps ahead of these people. Or you even see people who are doing better than you are, and you're looking at them like, I deserve to be, doing as well as this person, if not better. All right, money misroads and all that. 5th question, do I hoard? All right, do I keep my possessions, my things, my money and all to myself? Or have I grown in the joy of generosity? 6th question, do I manage well what I have been given already? So these are some of the questions I pulled up and said to share with us, to think, how we may not be so innocent of what James is hitting at here, even though we're not landowners, as it directly states, right? Very many of us have possessions way more than most people do, and covetousness, and because James is hitting at the condition of these people's hearts, the condition of our hearts regarding our possessions and our desires for more, has nothing to do with how much or how little we have. It's a condition of the heart. All right, so one monumental danger, coming back to our verse, about having money, that I think all of us would agree with, is the power that it confers, or the power that it brings with it. And obviously these people here, as we see in this passage, were misusing theirs, okay? And moving on to the other part of the verse, it says, to these rich people that he's identified, which I'll argue are the rich landowners, not necessarily Christian, back in his day. It says, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. And in the original languages, this is a figure of speech called an onomatopoeia, where the word you're using sounds like what the sound you're describing. For example, if you want to pop a bottle of champagne, the word pop sounds like the sound the cork makes when it comes out. So this is not a good thing to say. It is sound, it's the way people howl and wail, that's the word. When they are in deep, deep distress. So some of us, please, those of us around, sorry, I may keep calling us. Who else is there that can read for us? Rayomide, please read for us from Isaiah 13, verse 6. And Tapulu, I'll keep calling you because I know you're there for me tonight. Who else is there? Sister Tosin is there. Please read for us from Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 8. Who else is there?
Jeremiah 4.
Jeremiah 4, 8. Who else is there? For Thomas, please read for us from 1 Samuel 30, verse 4. Ayomide, I said
Good evening, everybody.
Hold on, I'm opening it.
Sorry, hold on in that order. Ayomide first. Isaiah 13, verses 6. I think read.
Okay.
Okay, Isaiah 13, 6. Wail for the day of the Lord. Wail, for the day of the Lord is near. It will come like destruction from the Almighty.
All right. So can you read the next verse a bit? Let me see.
Okay. Therefore, everyone's hands will become weak, and every man's heart will melt. Verse 8. They will be horrified. Pain and
Okay.
agony will seize them.
All right, thank you. So here in Isaiah, this weeping, this wailing, he connects it with the day of the Lord coming in judgment. And that's what James is doing here. That's why I pulled up this verse, to show us that James here is not talking about God coming to punish them in a temporary manner. Maybe their account balance will suddenly turn to zero or that kind of thing. But he's talking about ultimate judgments at the end of the age. That because of the behavior of these people, because of their attitude towards their money and how they've used it, they should start weeping and howling and wailing in advance of the level of destruction that God is going to mete out on them. All right. So who's next? Who did I call next? Jeremiah 4:8. Sister Tosin.
Yeah. So Jeremiah 4:8.
Yes.
For this put on sackcloth, lament and wail, for the fierce anger of the Lord has not turned back from us.
All right. So we see that the fierce anger of the Lord is directly connected with people putting on sackcloth and weeping and wailing. So James is talking like an Old Testament prophet here. He's using an Old Testament form of blessing and cursing, against these guys, to speak to these guys. All right. So in Jeremiah 31:15, it talks about Rachel weeping and wailing and refusing to be comforted because her children are no more. Very popular because it's cited again in the Gospels when Herod kills the children. So that shows that something very serious, something out of the ordinary has happened that has occasioned this kind of wailing. This is not wailing that your football team lost. This is wailing, for calamity of incalculable proportions that has come upon you, and you're wailing. And in the Middle East in those days, the way they wail is not the way we cry, that we cry small, that we dapping our eyes. This is all out crying where they're screaming and wailing, such that people at Omole Gate from here, they can hear and they will come running that, hey, what has happened? What has happened? Okay. Who did I ask to read 1 Samuel 34? Thomas, please read.
1 Samuel 30, verse 4. Then David said, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Then David and the people were with him Then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. David's 2 wives also had been taken captive.
All right, thank you. That's just what I wanted to get at. This is wailing of something like once in a lifetime. It's not the kind of thing that happens every day, kind of misfortune that is about to come upon them. And Isaiah tells us it's directly connected with God's judgment, God's ultimate judgment on these guys. So these guys who have misused their wealth, this class of rich people, and anybody like them today and in all generations, can only look forward to a certain judgment for which is so terrible that they might as well begin to weep and wail and roll on the floor and cover themselves in sackcloth and ashes here today. So he's talking about the final judgment. All right, so we move on to verse 2. It says, your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. So I want to ask us a question. I'm going to, please, everybody be ready to answer questions or read verses for us so we can move fast. Everybody. All right, so my question is, why does it say in verse 2 that their riches have become rotten and their garments have been damaged by moth? And besides, what is James's business if they keep their stuff and it gets spoiled? Why is James concerned about this? What is his concern? Let me call someone. Roshun Kupiti, are you there? Why do you think James is concerned, or why is he, denouncing these people who have stashed away their wealth and it has become rotten, and their garments, their clothes, their fine clothes actually, become eaten by moths? If Roshun is not there, is Sodium there? I can see Sodium. Please help us out.
What's the question?
The question is that from verse 2, James is denouncing these rich people who have stashed away their wealth, and now it has become rotten, and their garments have become eaten by moth. Why do you think James is talking about? What did they do? Why is James talking about this? What did they do wrong? Do you understand the question? Okay, let's just continue. All right, so from verse 4, we'll get a small hint, of why what James is hitting at. Okay, so then are you back?
Hello?
Yes.
Yes. I said from verse 4, they got into unlawful means, oppression, by not paying people, laborers their wages, oppression, cheats, and some other bad means. So they set their hope on it. So James was saying that their riches will not get them to heaven. As Christ said, do not store your wealth on earth where moth and
Yes, Matthew 6:19. Get us to read that.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Okay, so like Christ said that do not store your wealth on earth here where moths will eat and destroy. Instead, lay up riches for yourself in heaven. So they were trying to lay riches for themselves in earth by oppression, bad means, oppressing people, fraud, cheats.
Okay, thank you very much, Sodium. Thank you. All right, so again, Sodium has answered the question very well from Matthew 6:19. That was Matthew 6:19 he was referencing. We're going to read it. And what is going on here is that these rich people on whom James is calling down the judgment of God, they stashed away their wealth. And from verse 4, which we'll get to in a few minutes, we see that at least part, if not the whole of this wealth that they've stashed away, that they've hidden and kept back for themselves, was illegally gotten, was ill gotten, was gotten by fraud, all right, by defrauding the poor people who worked for them. So James is telling them that, see, your wealth that you stashed away, you couldn't even eat all of it or wear all the clothes, they become rotten and become moth-eaten. All right, and Jesus, this is the direct opposite of what Jesus wants in Matthew 6:19, to not store up treasure for ourselves here on earth. These people had done the very thing Jesus said to not do. All right, so I remember one photo making the rounds recently on social media of, they said, see a rich man's garage from the 60s. And they showed some 3 or 4 cars or 2 or 3 cars that were from maybe the 1960s, cars that were like the reigning cars then. Now looking like, I can't even use it to put my trash. Yeah, it's not even good enough for me to use as dustbin, as my trash. It's completely decayed and corroded and spoiled and worthless and useless. In an abandoned building, they took that picture and was making the rounds, and people were going about saying, see, this is why we shouldn't stash up wealth that decays. And that's in part, at least, what James is hitting at here, and what Jesus said, to not store up treasures for ourselves here on earth at the expense of other people, when they could have been put to good use for the good and and benefit of other people. All right. So hoarding is never a good thing, And these guys, they've not just hoarded. Think about times of fuel scarcity. I remember the last big fuel scarcity we had early in the Buhari administration. I remember seeing on the news how that they went around. I mean, think about even now that there's no fuel scarcity. I mean, should be the right of the owner of the fuel station to sell or not to sell fuel. I mean, if he locks up his fuel station, people just go elsewhere. But in a time of fuel scarcity, all right, it is criminal to hoard, all right, to have produce and then not sell. Okay, I saw when they were closing the filling station, some filling stations in Lagos and Ogun State, they sealed it off, and fined the owners very heavily for hoarding. Hoarding is never a good thing. And then hoarding excess food and clothing when other people are going hungry and naked is actually a wicked thing to do. All right? It's an immoral thing to do. So also think about the folly of stashing wealth in life that James has told us already. What is your life? You're here today, gone tomorrow. And then, think about like in the time of Jonah, ships in those days were very rich vessels because they had to carry everything they would eat for weeks or months or however it's long disease they are going to be on the sea, and money to buy things from stopovers. Think about it. When the storm came, they threw everything that had weight, even food at times, depending on how bad the storm is. They throw it overboard because at that time they have to prioritize, and you can see that, like Jesus said, that life is more important. It's more important than raiment. It's more important than food. Okay, so these guys.
Hello, Peter.
Yes. Who's that?
Yeah. I have like a question.
Okay, please.
Okay, so you see to say some people hoard because they have enough to hoard. But even we ourselves, don't we sometimes hoard things? For instance, like exactly looking at my family, then I know my mom, she has some coolers that she does not need. All those old cooler, all those old big plates, big broccoli plates that we don't need. But yeah, it's our own. In fact, I was even joking to my dad that maybe these are part of things that we inherit. But the point basically, we think it's easy to say some big men hoarded some cars and stuff like that. But don't we do this thing? Maybe if we had our way too, maybe we would have hoarded those things that they're hoarding. So I was just want to say that. So we also put things in mind.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's my point exactly. That we shouldn't distance ourselves from what James is denouncing here, because in one way or another, it touches us one way or another.
I have a question, please.
Yes, please. Desire.
So what if I'm a businessman and I'm expecting a future rise in price? So I buy everything cheap now and I hoard it, so that when the price rises in future, I sell it at a higher price. Is that bad too?
That would be speculation, and I think
That's the rich fool. What the rich fool did.
Yeah, that's speculation.
The parable.
Not exactly, but that would be speculation, right? But however, I think that is wrong. I think that is wrong, and but I also want to differentiate it from business people who have to stock up inventory that they are selling, because for business purposes, because it's cheaper to buy in bulk and then sell than anytime a customer comes like, wait, let me go and buy it from that kind of thing. So you have to stock up inventory. All right. So what is going on here? These guys were apparently not using the money. That's the point. It's like the parable of the talents, where the servants were given different amounts of the talents of gold, and one goes to hide it. He doesn't trade with it. He doesn't use it. He just hides it. All right. Which is So I would say that is different. I'll say that is different. Okay. So moving on. So in verse 3. We see that he says, your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. And then he says, you have laid up treasure in the last days. Okay, so I'll for time's sake, I'll just.
Sorry, I have a question.
Sorry, who's that? I can't see who that is. Yes, go ahead with your question.
That's me. Sorry, Ibukun. Yeah.
Oh.
So I'm using Ayo's phone.
Okay. Go ahead.
So basically, I guess the question is, are we going to distinguish between something like, for instance, what Joseph did? Because what he did was also hoarding, 7 years worth of hoarding. Because the Lord revealed that there's going to be famine. And of course, we don't know if there's going to be a famine or whatever, but there's a sense in which we need to save for the future, because you can't, if you just spend everything you earn or give everything away because, okay, I've provided for my family for this month and I have a little extra, so hey, let me just give the rest away. Of course, I suppose if that's what God leads you to do, then also trust that God will provide when the need comes. But I think there's a wisdom in also saying, okay, I'm going to set some of this aside for the future. So at what point does that cross over into hoarding?
I would say when it's excessive, and it's hard to draw the line.
Yeah, but what's excessive? How do we define excessive?
Exactly. This is. Yes, who's there?
I want to say something.
All right.
Hello?
Go ahead. Yes.
Okay. To me, I think hoarding is not bad, because hoarding is like speculating because something is scarce, so you don't end up losing. Because, for instance, now if I'm selling fuel and I know they want to increase the price of fuel, and I sell, and okay, I now stop selling fuel in order to know the price they will release for it, so I can sell at that higher price and then gain more and be able to buy more fuel. But what James is trying to say is, those, there are some people, like, they will have something. I do it when I was small. Like, you just have something, then you start looking at, yes, I'm having more. Though you don't have anything to do with it, you are not using it, you don't have any purpose, you just keep keeping it, and then your heart is trusting in it, like, yes, I'm having more, I'm going to be rich, I'm having this kind of thing. So I think this is what James is warning us.
Yes, hitting that. However, I would like to point us back to the context, right? The context here, as we'll see from later verses, is people who have hoarded wealth, all right, because it gives them the sense of security and power and sense of achievement, and they're hoarding it, as we're going to see, so that they may spend it on themselves for self-indulgence. So the context helps us to let us know that these guys were on another level, and it's not mere saving for the future, having savings or putting something aside, not eating everything you earn, so it is people hoarding at the expense of others for self-indulgence, and that's the context here. Okay, so.
Well, Peter, if I may say something.
Yes.
Okay, I think it's well, part of what you said and what Sodium just said, but I just want to say that example Sodium gave, I don't think is a good thing. I know that there's a place where, as a business person, for example, December is coming, you know that things will go up. So if there are things you normally sell, you may have to buy ahead, just like you said, so that it's not when customer comes, that's when you have to run around, and you may not even have, there may be scarcity. But there's a difference between you buying and not even selling it, as in, that, okay, you're buying this thing 5 naira, but in December, this will be 25 naira. And people want to buy now, you create artificial scarcity, that this thing is not available, so that you can make that 500% profit. I don't think that is a good thing.
Especially when it's essential goods, which is why government criminalizes
essential goods, yes, like food or fuel, things that people are suffering, and this thing is available. You got it very cheap, but because of greed, you decide to audit and say it is not available. That's what causes scarcity, artificial scarcity. That thing is available. People that have it don't want to sell, so it causes artificial scarcity, and the prices go up. The reason why the price goes up is because those that have little, they are scared that they will not have enough money to buy more when they need to restock. So the price goes up. So.
Okay, thank you, Sister Tosin. All right, so let's move on. So where are we now? Verse 3 says, your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. And I would ask a question here quickly, that why have their gold and silver become corroded? I think the answer is obvious, because they've stashed it away. They've not invested it. They've not put it to use. They've stashed it away, like the guy who went to bury his talents. All right. Naturally, and I don't think Now, naturally, gold does not corrode. It can last for a very, very long time. I don't think probably there's so much of a time limit even. It doesn't oxidize like other metals, right? So James's point is metaphorical in the sense that, see, the gold and silver, as we continue, he says their corrosion will be evidence against you. You know, there's a way you can stash gold away that it changes color. Maybe it doesn't spoil except it's mixed with other metals. It changes color and needs repolishing or refining, you know, to restore its shine. You know, so perhaps that is what James is hitting at here, that you've kept this thing away for so long, things that are needed now, right now, by people, like as we see here, the workers who have worked for you, in verse 4, you know, and they have become corroded. And James says something interesting here. He says their corrosion will be evidence against you. All right, this is like courtroom language, saying this is going to be exhibit A. All right, when you get to stand before the judge of all the earth, this is exhibit A against you, that you hid gold so much that it lost its luster, it lost its shine. And okay, and he goes on to say, and it will eat your flesh like fire. All right, so and it will eat your flesh like fire. Okay, so what is James talking about here? Apparently he's being figurative. And what is he hitting at here? All right, so I think in saying it's used against you, the very thing you're hiding, your precious. You know, how many of us watched Lord of the Rings back in the day? I did. I remember Smeagol, you know, and the ring, you know, and the way he would hold on to it, my precious, you know, that in my precious, you know. And James here says, you see, that your precious that you've hidden away. You know, I think he's making use of poetic justice here to say that it's going to eat your flesh like fire. Apparently, of course, not literally, but he is saying here that you're laying up of treasures in the last days at the expense of others. You're hoarding up these wealth is going to be followed by very, very severe, very painful consequences at the hands of God. All right. So the reference here is to punishment at God's hands, not like the gold is really going to eat their skin off. You know, so God is going to judge them for their avarice and their injustice, which is what is going on in this passage. And you know, so their misery. So I said poetic justice. How? Because there's some kind of irony in how God judges them here. He says, their misery shall arise from the very things in which they placed their happiness. You know, so rather than these things bringing them joy and peace and luxury, and you know that they're thinking of endless luxury that they're thinking of, it's going to lead to them being judged and pierce them through with many sorrows, like Paul said. And so I have a bit of a gory example that comes to mind here, and I think it's either a movie I watched or a novel I read, a book I read, or an article, a story that I read or watched somewhere. I have this image in my mind where a guy, a very greedy man, I don't know whether it was a rich guy like we're talking about here, but a very greedy man who had amassed a lot of wealth by defrauding other people. And these people, of course, I'm not recommending this, it's just the point I'm making. You know, they plan for him. You know, in the end, they catch him, you know, and they renounce him for his crimes. And what they do to him, that all the gold he was hiding, they brought them all together, melted them into a big bowl, much of the gold, not all, it was a lot of gold, into a big, melted the gold while the gold was molten, red hot, you know, they force him to drink it. And of course he dies, you know, and it's a very horrible death. You know, that kind of poetic justice, the very gold he was keeping, you know, is what they use in crashing his entire digestive system and killing him, you know, by pouring it into his mouth, you know. And we also want to think of the poetic justice in the case of Esther, of Haman, you know, the Agagites, who built gallows for Mordecai to be hung on, you know, and we remember the story of how the king eventually ordered that he himself be hung on those gallows, and he dies on the very gallows that he built with his own hands. You know, so James here is telling us that this, you know, like Yorubas would say, these wealth that you've hoarded, that you stored up fraudulently and everything, you know, it's what will, is what will be used to nail you in courts. All right, it's all be used to convict you in courts. You know, so he says here, you have laid up treasure in the last days. I'd like to ask us, someone quickly help us. What is wrong in laying up treasure in the last days? What's wrong with that? I wouldn't mind being able to gather like $1 billion. You know, I know we're in the last days of the last days, but what is wrong with that? So if someone please quickly speak up, so I don't have to.
It's because this in the last days, this world will be destroyed on the day of the Lord. This world will be destroyed by fire. So whatever it is that one has amassed or is hoarding will eventually be destroyed.
Amen. All right. So thank you very much. Thank you. So yes, it's because there's no point. You know, it's almost time for God to come and, as it were, hit the reset button. All your gold and silver are going to be obliterated. All right. So the best thing really is to put them to good use, the work of the Lord in blessing other people and all of it, rather than hoard it, you know, with the intention of expending all of it or spending all of it on yourself. You know, and talking about storing away or laying up treasure, I'd like for us to read, and gold and silver, I'd like for us to read a few verses. Brainusa, please read for us from Romans chapter 2, verse 5. Please come closer so you can speak into the mic. Who hasn't read for us? I'm seeing plenty of people here. Let me call names. Romans 2:5. Brainusa? Oh no, how did I do this? Sorry, hold on please. Okay, anyway, let's scroll. Sister Tosin, if you're there, please read again for us from Ezekiel chapter 7, verse 19. And Brother Hilary, if you're there, please read for us from Zephaniah chapter 1, verse 18. Zephaniah 1:18, Hilary. Sister Tosin, Ezekiel 7:19. And Brother Inusa will start out from Romans 2:5 quickly. Let's come closer.
Romans 2:5. Because of your stubbornness and your unrepentant heart, you are storing up wrath against yourself for the day of God's wrath, when his righteous judgment will be revealed.
Okay, so Paul says here that these people, because of their unrepentance, they are storing up wrath against themselves, against the day God's righteous judgments will be revealed. And that's exactly what James is saying to these people that they're doing here. They think they're wise in their own eyes, but they're actually being profoundly stupid. You know, in the context of this is the last days, this is the worst time in human history to be hoarding wealth. It will do you no good. All right, so Sister Tosin, please read for us from Ezekiel 7:19.
Ezekiel 7:19. They cast their silver into the streets, and their gold is like an unclean thing. Their silver and gold are not able to deliver them in the day of the wrath of the Lord. They cannot satisfy their hunger or fill their stomachs with it, for it was the stumbling block of their iniquity.
It was the stumbling block of their iniquity. This was the cocoa of their iniquity. They couldn't eat the silver and gold when God showed up to judge them. It didn't do them any good. It could not save them. You know, so this is James is standing right in the tradition of Old Testament prophets, as we're seeing, you know, in denouncing these guys in very harsh terms and pointing them to the judgment of God that will befall them. So, Bro Hilary, Zephaniah chapter 1, verse 18, quickly.
Hey. Zephaniah 1:18.
Yes.
It said, neither their silver nor gold shall be able to deliver them on the day of the wrath of the Lord.
All right,
and the fire of his jealousy, all the earth shall be consumed.
Okay, so all the earth shall be consumed, just like you said. The gold you have, you know, under your bed, under the ground in your, I don't know where, you know. I mean, I think it was in Nigeria here, maybe 2 years ago that I think when the Buhari government first came and they were chasing people who were in government under the last administration, and people were hiding, stacking loads and tremendous amounts of cash in Sockaway. I don't know where they kept the one that the snake swallowed, you know, and you know, so it's really stupendously foolish. It's even criminal, right, to take such kind of value of money or gold out of the system, right, and then stashing it away. If you leave it in a bank, I mean, they can use it to do something, pay you interest. At the very least, it's making the economy better. But stashing it such huge amounts of money, you know. So I want to ask a question and quickly try to answer it. So what is so bad about someone with wealth? It's my money, right? Let me throw the question to us. deciding to sit back, why did God call the rich man in Luke 12:20 a fool? Why? What did he do wrong? It's his money. All right. We are not told there that he's even like the people James is addressing here, that he stole the money or he got it fraudulently. It's his money. And he's deciding to tear down the barns he has, build up new ones, and retire, and take things easy, as he put it, for the rest of his life. What is wrong with that?
I think it's putting your hope in what you have achieved. So your hopes are displaced. You are now trusting in those things, instead of trusting in the person that has provided those things.
Absolutely. That is definitely one of the primary things going on here. And with James is, I think somebody else was going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think that that's the whole point, is that it's not his money. It's not our money. Deuteronomy talks about, God tells the Israelites that after you get into the land and then you get wealthy, don't forget the one who, I'm paraphrasing, but don't forget the one who gave you the power to get wealth. So the idea that the money is ours in any ultimate sense is wrong. It belongs to the one who gave us the power to get it. And if we treat the money in a way that doesn't even acknowledge that, I'm not saying you should, give all your money away so you can feel that you're serving God, but that some way, somehow, either through sharing with others or, whatever, help donating towards the needs of the church and things like that, we need to acknowledge consistently that this is not of our own doing. It is God's. It is through God that we have them in the first place.
Amen. Thank you, Sister Ibukun. All right, you're going to say something, Jimmy.
Okay.
Sorry, Uche, just speak loudly.
I think what could be wrong with what the rich fool did is because what he did is what the word does. Like if you are wise and you are wealthy, you do something like that if you don't know God. So maybe God don't want us to be like the world, because if we look at it in sincerity, there's hoarding in everything in this in our world, like in economics. If you look at the financial system, if you look at the stocks buying, people are holding stocks, so for price to go up. And so more people, so the price keeps shooting because people are hoarding it. If you look at housing now, the price of housing is because people are hoarding it. Those that don't need it can buy up to 100 houses. They are hoarding it. And they will be less available for others. So the price, so there's hoarding in everything in economics. Even some companies, they learn how not to produce too much, so they will not be too much out there in order for price that. So there's hoarding in everything. So I think one for Christians is just to be careful, because there's no how we can escape that hoarding. If you are going to plan for your future, somehow you will hoard one way or another to invest. If you invest in stock market, there's hoarding going there. If you invest in buying house or land that you are not using, I think there's also some kind of hoarding also.
All right, Uncle Thomas, you're going to say something.
Yeah. Thank you for this topic. I was just thinking about this hoarding of a thing, and I'm trying to ask a question. Like, for we as Christians, how do we know that we are not actually hoarding? Like, let me give you a particular a practical example of let's say you are trying to maybe move to another apartment. You want to move somewhere else, or you want to get a car or something, and you are saving money for it, and and in as much as the Bible has said that everything in this world is going to be burned down, like totally, like all the amount of wealth, all the wealth we are keeping on this earth is going to be burned down. So how do we as Christians know that these things that look so genuine hoarding? Is it only by acknowledging that or checking your heart to know what is your intentions? I don't know if you get what I'm saying. Like, I'm just trying to draw a balance with that. I just hope that what I am doing is not hoarding. I'm trying to ask a question that, hello?
Yes.
Did you get me? Your network is fluctuating.
It went off for a while, but I want to know, are you asking a question or you're making a comment?
Yes.
Sorry.
I'm asking a question. I'm trying to clarify. I'm asking a question.
Okay.
Answer Thomas's question.
Yes, please.
Okay.
I think when you are saving, when you have something definite you are planning to do, and you are saving towards it, it's different from hoarding. Hoarding is just keeping the money. There's no immediate need. You have not assigned it for anything, but it's just to give you a sense of security. You are just saving so that you can feel okay, I'm covered. It's not as if there's so if, for example, you want to get a new place or you want to buy a car and you are saving towards it, fine. But let's imagine that you are saving to get a car, Thomas, and somebody comes to you tomorrow and says, Thomas, I want you to have this car. Would you be willing, that money you were saving to get the car, would you be willing to look around for people who might have a need, or people who have things that, that is pressing on them? If the Lord has graciously given you that car from someone else, would you be willing to give that money to meet another need in the church or somebody else? So I think that is the issue. It's an issue of the heart. So it's not wrong to plan towards meeting something. But if you're just keeping the money, just like Tosi was alluding to the rich fool, if it's just to say, my soul, you have arrived, then I think that is the problem.
So what about saving for a rainy day then? You're not particularly saving for anything, but
I think there's a thin line between saving for, there's a very thin line, and we need to be very careful, because the Bible says, give us this day our daily bread. I'm not saying we should be careless or not think of the future, but the truth is that God will always provide for his own. And even as we save for the future, that's when the book was talking about Joseph, I don't really think what Joseph did was hoarding, because it was a time of plenty. Everybody had enough to eat. It wasn't that Joseph was keeping it and there were people that were hungry at that time. And and God had showed him that there will be a time of need. So it was wisdom from above to keep, so that they don't waste. They don't, there's a tendency when you have enough to just buy even things you don't need or do things you don't need. So I think what Joseph was doing was that he was mopping up the excesses, keeping them for the future.
And it turned out to be just enough to take them through.
I don't know. Sorry, I'd like to say something. A totally different angle. Please, I agree with everything. I just want to add that there's something I've observed. Yes. That's communal spirit is not really there anymore in our midst, and we need to check it. Like we saw in Acts, the early church. So now there's this, because of especially because of the country we find ourselves in, because of the economy, hardship, and all that. There's this is it tendency, or the fact that everybody expected to survive one way or the other. So it has made us a bit, I don't want to use the word selfish, but we tend to think about ourselves more and first, So even when you know that people are genuinely hungry around, but all you can think of at that time is that thing you are saving for. Because I understand that there's need to save. Of course, you have a rent, you have to pay, but beyond that, we have to also be conscious of ourselves, of people around us, even in the little that we have, to still be willing to give.
Yes,
even in our need, like the Thessalonians church, to still be willing to give.
All right, thank you, Sister Tosin. So you jumped right into what I was going to say, because other people have said the other aspects of it. So quickly, another way to look at the issue of the rich fool was that God actually commands that nobody, no matter how rich or poor, whatever you are, to live exclusively for themselves. All right, but to lead lives that actively benefits others as much as possible. God hates self-centeredness, self-indulgence with a passion. All right, so Philippians 2:4 says, let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also the interests of others. We must be very careful, and it's something we're very prone to do as humans. It's a result of our broken heart too. Once we are okay, we just lock up, So, and we don't care, like Sister Tosin was saying, the communal spirit is not, it was something the Christian church was very well known for, in its early years, and it's something we need to revive, that we look out for other people, we pay attention, we actively go out of our way to help, to assist, to cheer up. Sometimes it's not always money. sometimes your attention. Like Jesus said, I was sick, you did not visit me. But not be closed in, not be closed circuits, right? Make sure that we are sacrificing and giving up of our time and our resources to be of help, to be of benefit to other people, and not just church folk, not just other Christians, but of course charity begins at home, yes, but not just Christians, but people around us. All right, so in verse 4, it says, behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. So I think this is like the centerpiece of this passage of what these guys have been doing. This tells us how, at least in part, they became rich. They kept back payments that was due these laborers who had worked for them, who had broken their backs, toiling for them, and bringing in their harvest. They refused to pay them. All right, now, James is here, might be talking about them finding fault in their agreement, on their negotiations with those guys, and capitalizing on it to not pay those guys or to delay payments, or using some technicality or legality or whatever the reason might have been in each of the specific cases, to not pay these workers. And James is here saying that they're crying out against you. So first of all, when I read this, I mean, it's something that still goes on today. A lot of supposed employers of labor, including governments, I think, some governments in Nigeria, I don't know of the federal government, but at least some state governments, owe salaries to stupendous periods that I mean, 10 months, 13 months, one that I heard, and I remember seeing a meme some days ago, like 4 or 5 days ago, on WhatsApp, someone stated, I laughed and laughed and laughed, and later I thought about it, that this is actually something serious and precisely what James was talking about. So the meme was very funny. It was a governor, a state governor, it's that time of the month, he dashes to Abuja, collects federal allocation, all right, collects federal allocation, they pay him complete the federal allocation, and then he goes back to his state and he's in his office, he puts the money in his account, right? And then when his Ministry of Finance people call him, Baba, how are we going to pay salaries for this month? He says, tell them that government doesn't have money to pay. So that is something that happens way too. It's what James is describing here is not uncommon to us. It's not unknown. So people who owe salaries deliberately. You hear of cases where it's not that the money was not there. Federal government released the money, or the money was available. They sometimes they carry the entire money, put it in some private accounts, fixed deposits, and they're waiting for a humongous interest to be paid. And those are even the nice ones. At least they will still pay. And they say, actually, I will still pay you your money. That kind of thing. And the way they delay these people, maybe for a few months, maybe 3 months, 6 months, and then maybe when they want to strike or they decided striking or something, then you now pay them 6 months ago salary, and then there are a lot of schemes I've heard, but that is one of the more common ones. So, and when we read this, I'm sure we in our hearts will say, yes, I know that's a very wicked thing to do. I would never do something like that. But then again, let's try to bring it home to ourselves. I'm sure that maybe not all of us, not many of us are employers of labor. Some of us might be, and this directly applies to us. But how about those of us maybe laborers, skilled artisans, they do stuff for us. They come to us, to carpenters, electrician, bricklayer, tiler, what else? They work for you, they come and do something for you, and for whatever reason, sometimes we don't pay them. We look for some fault, we don't pay them, or some reason we unduly delay payments. So I wanted us to read, so this basically this does come very close to home for some of us. I wanted someone to read for us. Sister Tosin, if you're there, please read Jeremiah 17:11. All right, talking about people who have fraudulently acquired wealth. Jeremiah 17:11. And then Sister Jumoke, if you're there, please let me know quickly. Can you read for us from Deuteronomy 24, verse 15? So Sister Tosin first. Yay. Sister Tosin, are you there? No, inside, if you're there, please quickly read for us.
17:11.
Yes, Jeremiah 17:11. Sister Jumoke, if you're there, please let me know.
Like a partridge.
Like a partridge, yeah.
Okay, like a partridge that did not lay is the man who gains riches by unjust means. When his life is half gone, they will desert him, and in the end, he will prove to be a fool.
All right, so here in Jeremiah, so it's not something that just started in the time of James. It's been on since the days of Jeremiah and before that. And here it says, people who live like this, people who do these kinds of things, in the end, they'll be empty-handed. In the end, they'll turn out to be proven to have been very, very, very foolish. So Sister Jumoke, please read for us from Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 15.
Okay. Sister Jumoke is a bit busy with J's. I will read.
Okay, sir.
Deuteronomy 24:15.
Yes.
You shall give him his wages on the same day before the sun sets, for he is poor and counts on it, lest he cry against you to the Lord, and you be guilty of sin.
All right, so this is actually a sin that was even clearly spelled out in the law of Moses, that these people were breaking with such careless abandon. So and God gives the reason there. He said that because the person may be poor, maybe he has not eaten since morning. It's from that money that he's going to get something to eat that night, or feed his family that night, and you come back the next day for what they're going to eat the next night. Withholding payment from him is a very wicked, thing to do. So it really is, and it's a form of wickedness that we've gotten used to, and I think there might be a warning we can pick from it for us. When people come and do stuff for us, they come and work for us, to go out of our way, make sure you're quick. They've done the work, make sure you're quick to pay, to pay up, because they depend on it, like Deuteronomy says. So there's a story I remember now, someone I know that had a tailor come from afar. The person lives in Lagos, and he has this plenty of materials that he bought in the market, and he wanted this tailor that he heard was very good. Called him on the phone, got his number, called him. Please come to my house, come and see me some time. Let's discuss. Come and measure me, and then tell me how much you're going to do all this plenty, make different attires for me from these materials I bought. And the guy comes from afar, from a very far part of Lagos, through the traffic, comes to his house, and then they talk for like 1 hour, and they couldn't agree on the price. The price the man was calling was too high, and this person is like, now wow, but oh yeah, please, I can't do it with you. And they agreed to disagree, as we'd say. And then rather than allow the person walk away empty-handed, he goes inside, brings out a reasonable sum of money, and says, please, take for your transport. Let it not be said that I made you even come across from town for nothing. Just so that, it's not that he would have done anything wrong in saying, his business you came to negotiate. The business did not click, be going. But just take this, to go back, just to be sure that he had not wronged that other guy, that tailor guy. So I would say that for us, a warning would be that we, as it were, walk on eggshells around people who work for us, whether as employees or contractors. Be very careful to pay them up, right? So I remember another story quickly, as to the effects of this, of another man who was doing some major renovations in his house. Right, so and then the guy who came, noticed that the guy was very good, he was doing all the work, he was doing it. And I called the guy, man, you seem to be really good at this. And he said, yes, sir. I started talking to him, and he's surprised to find out that, man, this guy is educated, he's a graduate. You're doing this handwork. I no wonder you're doing it so well. Oh, that's good, that's good. And he starts to talk to him, and then he finds out that actually I used to have a business. I used to have a company myself. I had workers who used to work for me. I used to get jobs like this. We come, we do it much faster. And the man was like, really? Hey, I thought that there's some misfitness or something that doesn't fit well with you. What happened? What happened to your business? And then the man starts to narrate his story and says, see, that how it is, that he will get a job and he will bring his guys because it's based on projects. When they finish doing the job, he makes sure that he pays his guys He pays for the supplies, he pays for the wood, for the wires, for the whatever it says they used to do the job, because he can't afford to owe those people. But when it's time for his clients to pay him, they then don't pay. Right? They don't pay. They keep owing and owing, owing and owing. Eventually, he couldn't sustain the business. He had to close it down and start, life afresh, in the sense that start looking for a job one by one, like that. So his business crashed because people owed him to a halt, as it were. So, and I thought of that there are lots of Nigerian businesses. I know some, from experience, that went down because people just wouldn't pay. All right, they would take. I mean, some of them. I know one. A company. I know someone that works in a company where there's this big man that's always in the news. In fact, in this COVID-19 situation, in fact, another example is a popular bank. I won't mention their name. That they were giving 1 billion or so for the fight against COVID, but they were busy sacking workers and all of them. We had some were owing workers, but in public, but the others were owing workers. In public, they were given huge sums of amount just for the photo op. So this person I know working in this small company that's struggling to survive and make ends meet. They've been one of their biggest clients, one of the biggest jobs they did, about maybe a tremendous amount of maybe 30-40 million naira. They've been owed by this billionaire guy, like a Dangote miss. The guy, 30 million is something he can just on his phone, like just do a transfer, credit them. You're sorted. He's owing them that tiny amount of money, but you see him every day, pouring maybe 1 billion, 2 billion for the fight against COVID. He's spending money, he's opening new factories, he's doing all kinds of huge stuff, with humongous amounts of money. But pay us our 30 million, please. We can't pay staff. We're about to shut down, and he's refusing to pay. So it's quite it's a common form of wickedness that James is addressing here. And I would say for us to as I said before, be very careful to tiptoe around people who work for us and go out of our way to pay for them, or to pay them. All right. So in Deuteronomy 32 verse 35, it says, "Vengeance belongs to the Lord," and it's this sort of context of oppressed people and God who cannot defend themselves, and God coming to their rescue. So in verse 5, it says, "You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter." So what's going on here? So it's not as if God forbids us to use pleasure, but to live in pleasure as if for nothing else, or as if the primary reason why, I've forgotten the word, whether stoics or hedonists or something, people that live for pleasure, that think that pleasure is the highest good. So it's it might sound crazy to you, but it's a temptation that a lot of rich people fall into. They limit to how much pleasure they want. I'm sure even King Solomon, I'm sure he went from, let me see what it's like to have 10 wives. Okay, I've seen, let me see what it's like to have 20, 30, and then he goes all the way up to 1,300 wives, 700 concubines. So once you go down that path of making an idol of your belly, of your flesh, wanting to please your body, more pleasure, and then some more pleasure, and some more pleasure after that. We're going down the slippery slope of I don't know the right word, is it lasciviousness or voluptuousness, or wanton seeking of pleasure. All right, so self-indulgence I have here. Self-indulgence, I believe, is like taking selfishness or self-centeredness to the nth degree, right? So, and when we do so, we make ourselves little gods that we pour our oblations to, that we spend all our time, all our money wanting to please ourselves and pleasure ourselves. All right, I see a lot of this around me. In fact, there's a guy, a business contact. Anytime I look at his WhatsApp page, I'm going to block him soon. He's always posting. It's almost like that's all his own dream, to get to the point where he's like this rich fool, where he has enough money to just go and live on one Greek island, and there's wine and food and good-looking people and women all around, and he's just in luxury all these days. He's always posting videos and pictures of pure opulence. Sometimes I think it's 3D images. I have to look closely and see there's actually real pictures. There are people actually living like this. So the Bible condemns all such tendencies, And come to think of it, let's imagine that you get to a point where you have maybe $10 billion trillion, and you know I need to work. A godly heart would not default to, aha, I have arrived. Let me go and buy a Greek island. Let me build a monument to myself. Let me carve my name in stone. Let me a godly heart will not default to such. It would rather dedicate it. What it means, if you ever get to a point where you don't have any needs of your own anymore, anything to worry about, it means that you're finally free to dedicate yourself to serving others. All right? So there is never a right situation to live for oneself. Like our sister said, our lives are not our own. All right? So is our possessions, not our own. And whenever our heart, God forbid, settles on such, descends to such a level, we're declaring ourselves to be finally completely useless. And whatever is useless, like Jesus says, will be gathered together and burned in the fire, which is what James is saying here, that these people have put themselves in. All right. So again, trying to bring this home, like when we talk about people who live for pleasure, you will think that no, this doesn't apply to me. This doesn't apply to me. I mean, but like the guy on my WhatsApp status, do we sometimes fantasize about a life like this? I just want to be like, I just want to just wake up, have fun, do whatever I want, do wherever I want, just live for I don't want any trouble, I don't want anywhere to go. I just want to, do this sometimes. I know some people who fantasize about over such things, or do we sometimes daydream of the kind of opulence or envy, those who flaunt theirs, all over social media, on TV. There's people flaunting, whether real or fake, there's people flaunting their wealth and luxury, their luxurious lives. So if we do, then the root of this thing is in our hearts as well, just waiting for opportunity, which I pray God never allows to come our way. And it is something that we must repent of and get rid of. Okay, so the last verse, as we close, it says, "You have condemned and murdered the righteous person who does not resist you." All right, so apparently this is like, a good example from the Bible with King Ahab taking Naboth's vineyard and then committing judicial murder, getting him killed. All right, for his own property. So these people have enriched themselves from the sweat of these very poor people who are defenseless, who cannot take them to court. They don't have money to feed, and then they're like, the way we act, like nothing will happen. What they won't do? What are they going to do? I shriek, when I hear people talk like that. But really, that's how most people, if not all people in their brokenness, think. People do things, on the confidence that nothing will happen. The person can't do anything. I'm not going to get caught. Nothing is going to happen. I can do this thing and get away with it. All right. So even people who try to fight for their rights, you see, I think in 2004, Sunday Oliseh was captain of the Super Eagles, and he left on that very not so good conditions, having served Nigeria as a player for a long time. I remember then because Spain. All right. So what happened? I don't know that. I think that was why he left. He had been fighting the NFF, the Nigerian Football, the NFA then, the Nigerian Football Association, to pay the players. This same situation. Super Eagles come, they will call them from the abroad, they will use their money to fly planes, come here to camp, they train, they fly to where they're going for the competition, they stay away from their clubs, away from their family, they play competition, they are winning matches, they are entering the group stage. All the match bonuses and whatever they are supposed to pay the players, they won't pay them. When government releases it, maybe somebody will siphon it and go put it into fixed deposit. Or I don't know what they do with the money, or just park the thing aside. And somebody said, had been fighting with them over this, and then I don't know what he did to them. I know you must pay us our money. Maybe remove his wrapper, tie it around his waist. You must pay us our money, that kind of thing. They didn't pay. All they did was had him removed as the captain, fought with him. I don't know whether they were those that asked him to leave, or he got angry and left the team. He was fighting for his rights and the rights of the other players whom they had not treated well. Other players, and I think we did very poorly in that competition, and this was a major reason. And it's something that keep recording. Even the last World Cup the Super Eagles went to, I think in Brazil or where, the same thing was happening. All right, they will not pay them. Government will release money. The money will be hanging in mid-air. It will not get to the players. So people do get the short end of the stick for daring to stand up for their rights when they are oppressed. But very often people can't do much about it. So I said that the backbone of people who are this wicked is that nothing is going to happen to them. They're confident about it. So somebody please read for us from Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verse 11, as we seek to round up to conclude. Ecclesiastes 8:11. Uche, please read for us if you're there. Or anyone of you two here, or anybody online who gets there first. Ecclesiastes 8:11.
When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, people's heart are filled with schemes to do well.
Yes. So when the sentence for an evil crime is not quickly carried out, people's hearts they become emboldened, and that is what's been happening here. Because God doesn't immediately judge people who live like this, others are emboldened to walk the same path, right? They see that these guys become rich, nothing happens, they don't go to jail, God doesn't strike them dead, their children are doing well, they're getting richer and richer, and in fact, people over time forget the source of their wealth, they seem to be doing well, okay? But scripture assures us that God has set a day when he will bring judgment down on all such people who oppress and persecute people who are less privileged than they are. All right, so in rounding up, I'll just read out to us that, so the four sins, I mentioned there were four sins I think I identified from this passage that James is hitting at. Number one is that of hoarding up money, context, when it was necessary for, not when it was necessary, when it was unnecessary, hoarding up money when it is unnecessary for their real support and comfort, and when they might do much good with it. All right. Number two is keeping back the wages which was due to people who had worked for them, who had cultivated their fields. All right. And number three was that of giving themselves up to a life of ease, luxury, and sensual indulgence. Right. Number four would be that of wronging and oppressing good and just men who just want what, scripture says that the laborer is worthy of his hire, of his wages. You just want what is theirs, and then you oppress them and even kill them. So James is here alluding in verse 6 that he might have as well killed some of these people or had them killed, or by virtue of withholding. Sometimes there are people that are in such dire conditions that all you need to do to finish them is just withhold their payment, withhold their money, just make sure that they can't eat, they can't feed themselves. Before long, they will die, or some great misfortune will take them, and then nobody's coming after you for their money. All right, so there are a lot of people. Yes. Okay, number one is that of hoarding up money when you don't really need it, at the expense of people who do and who have the right to it, whose money it is. Number two is keeping back the wages, the payments meant for people who have worked for you. Number three is that of giving up yourself to a life of ease and luxury and sensual indulgence. Basically, a life of unlimited enjoyment, right? It's many people's goal in life. So it's often a difference between those who have the means to do it for themselves now and those who are still daydreaming and wishing and working their way towards it. All right, number four is that of wronging and persecuting good people, or these workmen who want to get their payments. So before I close, I just wanted to say that three things that James is not hitting at have the possession of riches in general. He's talking more about how it is acquired, how you come about your wealth. Number two, how it is used or misused. Number three, how we hold it in our hearts, how we regard it in our hearts. So it's a matter of the heart. So any questions or comments? Hopefully not many, because we've overshot our time. Any questions or comments? We're still online. Okay, let's sing from him. In the absence of no comments, I'd say we sing from him 535. And then, who will pray for us? Brother Hilary, if you're there, please pray for us after we finish singing. You remember the hymn? I think I do. Okay, so. Oh, the deep, deep love of Jesus, vast, unmeasured, boundless, free, rolling as a mighty ocean in its fullness over me. Underneath me, all around me, is the current of thy love, leading onward, leading homeward, to thy glorious rest above. Oh, the deep, deep love of Jesus, spread his praise from shore to shore. How he loveth, ever loveth, changeth never, nevermore. How he watches o'er his loved ones, died to call them all his own. How for them he interceded, watcheth o'er them from the throne. Oh, the deep, deep love of Jesus, love of every love the best. 'Tis an ocean vast of blessing, 'tis a heaven sweet of rest. Oh, the deep, deep love of Jesus, 'tis a heaven of heavens to me, and it lifts me up to glory, for it lifts me up to thee. Amen. Sorry, I forgot to paste the scripts to project the